and here we go.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today for our episode about how we call shows and calling scripts. Personally, my favorite part of stage management in theater is show calling. I love calling cues and navigating that ship. Also, being the show caller is a very separate thing from stage management. Obviously, show calling is a part of stage management, but you can actually be contracted on corporate events, which I do a lot of those, to just be the show caller, where you're really just responsible, unless it specifies otherwise in your contract, to call the cues for that project. So I am going to screen share two scripts of mine. It work? Can you guys see that? Yes? Good, thank you. This is a show I've been doing for over a year called Places. It's actually been recalled recently, renamed Garden of Allah, which is actually a better name for the play. It has to do with the hotel this character in real life actually created. And I don't have a key, but normally in another script of mine, I'll show you a key. You know, it's all personal. It's all for me. I do extra lights, that's actually how our sound designer wrote some of our video and sound cues, prologue, pre-out. I was the lighting designer, so I got to choose that. And then I do colors. I highlight. It's just easier to see sometimes, especially in some of these smaller theaters with the limited lighting, just for myself. And I go through, and P for projection or video, it depends the designer. It doesn't matter to me personally. If you give me an emoji to call, I could do it. It doesn't bother me at all. And we just go through, and this is a really fun show for me to call personally. I've called it, I couldn't tell you how many times I've called it at this point over the course of over a year, but I never get bored. I always find something new. And because I've done over 21 person shows, this is one of them. But what I love about one person shows is that I'm her scene partner. Romy Nordlinger wrote this and stars in this piece. I'm her scene partner. So I am navigating the emotions of the show, not just the physicality of it. So every time there's a cue, I have to feel it really in my heart, not just like a robot. So yes, you see the word Allah, but if I'm not feeling it, if she's not feeling it, maybe I'm going to call it on garden. So that is literally like, where I'm supposed to call it my safety, but you have to call on the emotion, especially on this show. Is a very emotional, intense show. I think at the end, can't remember because I haven't looked at the end in a while, but yeah, we had a little talk back at the curtain call. Our sound designer also played piano and he'd sing at the end. And just, the bump out. We had an emergency cue, which I never had to use, fortunately. And then these just two slides were up for the talk back. But kept it very simple. Let me quit that, stop screen share. And then I'm going to show you one more, which is another one person show I did called Hi Hitler at Cherry Lane in the West Village a few years ago. And you'll see the key here as soon as I share. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, please, and we will answer them throughout and at the end. All right, someone give me a thumbs up if they can see that, please. Good. So you see here, I have a key because there wasn't it I thought I was going to actually need a sub, and I didn't end up having it to need one, but I threw the key in there anyway in case that had happened. Keep it simple. Again, colors, make it bold. And occasionally I'll do an arrow, especially, it's not, again, because I thought someone else was going to be calling the show for a sub one night. Sometimes I do arrows. Some people like that, some people don't. I ask to, I don't just go off what I think, especially if it is someone personally coming in to do this with new people that they necessarily haven't worked with. And you just go. There were actually a ton of light cues in this show. I love our director so much, but he threw a lot in. It was really fun. We had very little time to actually tech the show, but we got through it. as quickly as we could with no drama, luckily. Just went through, and we had fun. And I got to work at one of kind of a bucket list theater of mine in the city. Cherry-Lane, I think, is the oldest off-Broadway theater in the country, and it's in a beautiful part of the city. And it was during the summer around now, so nothing bad. And yeah, just, you know, keep it simple. I tend to write things on the right because usually a person's eye actually catches the right. I've worked on shows where someone has written it in different ways for me, and I've had to rewrite it just because it doesn't make sense to me if it's on the left or in the margin or something. And that I didn't have a lot of time to speak up and say, I can't read it this way. I just kind of had to rewrite it myself when they weren't looking, and because I didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. But it is okay if you have the time or not have time to speak up and say, this is how I can do it. I'm the one calling the show. Please make it as easy as possible for me, especially on one-person shows where you're being thrown curveballs left and right sometimes. So, and it's, you know, all the same throughout. I keep it, you know, keep it as simple as I can. The arrow method doesn't work for everyone. That's just my personal choice. I saw it on The Lion King, actually, when I went to shadow it, so I took it from there, and I liked the way they wrote out their cues. So, and same for corporate events. This is how I do it, but then generally I handwrite it because those are so short, you know, you don't have time to, unless you have an iPad, I guess you don't have time to do it electronically. I don't think there's anything too crazy in this one. There was no automation, neither for places either, just video lights and sound. And I am personally someone that, especially if I do so many one-person shows and I do lighting design, I do sound design, I do video programming, I don't mind running the boards, of course, as long as I'm being paid for that, and that will be in my contract. But because Kanehara, if something does go wrong, I can quick fix it, where I've had great board ops in the past, but I have had ones that get tense and then you're walking them through trying to fix it, where it just takes a little longer and you might miss something where, yeah, the show's not going to end, but it's just, I personally don't mind it. And I don't mind being that DJ of, it's fun for me. It keeps me on my toes, keeps me awake. These shows I generally do can be fast 90-minute ones. So, you know, I don't drink caffeine, I don't drink coffee. So that keeps me awake as well. Let me just check my notes for a sec. But I'm now going to turn this to Lisa, who's going to talk about her experience with calling shows.
Afternoon, everyone. I mostly work on new shows. I'm also like Lizzie. I do occasionally run a board. I prefer to run a light board, but I've run sound as well. Obviously, yes, it's also in my contract as an equity stage manager because that's an extra duty. But I have gotten a lot of jobs from people who say, I know that you can do this. Will you run a board? And I'm like, yeah, if you're gonna pay me extra, yeah, I'll run the board. I don't care. So that is something that I prefer to do. But because I do a lot of new works, and I'm gonna screen share if my computer will let me. That means a lot of changes rapidly. It's sometimes thrown at you in different places, in different ways. So sometimes you just have to be prepared. And hopefully I will get through all of this before the storm takes out any power for me. There we go. Can everybody see? We're good?
Yep.
So I did this. This is a show I did about almost 2 years ago. Unfortunately, the lead actor in my show was also the writer, so it was not uncommon for him to come in the day of, this was in previews, and go, here's new pages. Please send them to me in advance. No, that never happened. So as you can see, this is a quick throw together of adding in a new ending. 5.1 was this particular ending. That should tell you how many times in previews our ending changed. So we had to take out parts, and then this was the new pages that he added. But the new pages that he added, again, being an actor primarily, not a writer, he was like, okay, this top of the page is the scene. Then we go back to the scene that was already in there at page 83, do that scene for 3 pages, and then come back and here's the rest of the ending. So on the fly, this is what I'm creating. So as you can see, it's handwritten with notes to myself as to how this all works so that we could get through the show. This is the scene that we went back to. And then the final page with the end. So sometimes on the fly, when you're working on a new show, this is what you have to do. It's not fun, it's not pleasant, but we do what we have to do. The next thing I'm going to show you, to look at my notes, this is from a show I did called Composure. We had projections, we had lighting, we had sound cues. Projections and sound cues were all run through QLab, which was great, and I did have a board op for that who was amazing. But this show, the set had a lot of Tetris-like pieces that turned in different ways to be able to move throughout the show. So this is an example of a scene transition in the script. So you will see that we have the actors coming in, 2 actors coming in, one from upstage right, one from upstage left, moving. Each of the pieces was, we had like A, W, B, W, C, L, so that we all knew what they were. If you're familiar with the Broadway show Newsies, the 3 towers, Aonce, Beyonce, and Ceyonce is what they were named. So it kind of took that idea. And then this is the opposite side. So what you saw here is, this is the left page of my script. This is the right page as we go into the scene. So we have projection cue and then light and sound cue that happens off of Fletcher's entrance at the same time. And that's what they look like side by side in my script. There are programs that you can do that will create this instead of doing it by hand, such as StageRight. I'm familiar with StageRight. It's not something that I use a lot, so I'm much more comfortable with doing things by hand for that reason. Lizzie talked about the fact that a lot of times you're working on a show that is an emotional piece that you really need to be connected to the feel of your actors and how those cues can shift. This is a piece that I did called the Chekhov Dreams. Beautiful emotional piece. And I kind of had a one-man show similar to what Lizzie has done a lot of in the middle of the script. In this scene, Jeremy has been rejected by 2 women. I won't give everything away, but he is distraught, and he has decided that he is going to end his life, and so he takes pills and falls into a coma and goes into a dreamlike state. So we have a lot of light cues going on. The actor is on stage by himself for a couple of minutes as he's going through this particular upheaval and making the decision and then taking the pills and then going into the dream state. We had set moving as well. And the actor is going to move at his own pace. I have to judge as a stage manager, where is he moving? How quickly is he moving through this sequence? Therefore, the cues, as you can see, are marked as to what word I would normally call them on. But as Lizzie pointed out, a lot of times, if the actor's moving faster, that cue is going to change. If the actor's moving slower, that cue is going to change. As a matter of fact, one of the most difficult cues to call is the sequence here, which goes off of Eddie, Please Forgive Me, I Did It for Love. At that point, the actor would fall over on the couch and then it would get up, and we had a moving light that had a gobo in it, so it was whirling, and we had to make sure that that light as moved with him, and he and the light hit the same spot at the same time. Drove the lighting designer crazy in tech. She kept giving it timing. He would walk faster, he would walk slower, and I finally said to her, you and I've worked together before. Do you trust me enough, since I'm running the light board for this sequence, to let me call this cue on my own, depending on where I feel he is emotionally at that point? She said, yes, I did it. She was like, thank you, let's keep going, awesome. So that is how that works. The last show I did before lockdown, another new piece called A Peregrine Falls. And as you can see, I also use color like Lizzie, so that it's easy to distinguish in a darkened booth or backstage. I call mostly from the booth, front of house, and that is my favorite spot to be in. And this sequence, very heavy light and sound cues. I again ran the light board, but I had a soundboard operator. So we had to work very tightly in tandem. I also feel it's very important when you're working with operators that you're talking to them ahead of time about how do they like to hear cues called, what is your normal process for calling cues, making sure you found a common ground of language so that everybody's on the same page, as well as having that key in there so that you know what's going on. And then we're all running very quickly and smoothly. I also have seen some stage managers, and I did it for one show that was a very easy show called digitally. All of my scripts are paper. I do have them on digital, but I usually I call from the actual paper script. But I do know some stage managers that call from programs like Scriptation. I did that for one show. I had like maybe 10 cues total, so it's easy to do. But that is not something that I feel comfortable relying on, but that option is out there to have the technical ability to do that. But I would also recommend that you have a paper script in hand to call from. So those are just some examples of my calling scripts. I'm going to turn it over to Ingrid, who's going to give us a little more about how she sets things up.
Okay. So a lot of my experience has been from college, even to now, more musical or regional theater based, not so much new work as a PSM. I tend to do that right before this period as an ASM, so I haven't had to worry so much about script changes when it comes to calling. A little bit, yes. I did find an example of that where we had been moving something around and I didn't have it quite in the right place, but I don't actually have those PDF for digital to show. So I kind of do a lot of my calling tends to be a lot of visual based, but I also have seen the complexity of like very specific, know the music inside and out beat based with choreo. Probably the most recent show I called had some one complex called the parade sequence, which was very much with that designer, who I love for that, lighting wise. He accented the music and the choreo. And that was the third time I'd worked with him. Second time teching a show. The first time I learned to call a show he had designed. But it's always fascinating to me when it comes together, like if the choreographer choreographs to the music, like very much hitting the beats of the music, and then the lighting designer accents that, putting them all together is probably speaks to that satisfaction of marrying everything. I remember one time, which I don't have an example of this because I do not create digital scripts, nor have I really scanned them, but it was a production of Spring Awakening.
Okay.
And calling Totally Fucked for the first time. Sorry, language, it's the name of the song. It was so intuitive how it happened just because of speaking the same language of the beats and knowing that choreography inside and out. Like the first time I called it, it was pretty much perfect. Didn't get a chance to really celebrate that, but that was one of my favorite numbers to call. And even now when I listen to it, I still remember some of those moments and some of the choreography. So I'm going to show you, actually first starting off a script I didn't actually put the cues into, but actually had to learn to call myself from another stage manager. This is from the same lighting designer I was just speaking about. In the musical realm of the show, but not quite in musical. It's a play with music, probably one of the more famous, widespread ones, Peter and the Starcatcher. So I'm going to screen share. This is the sequence of the show that whether I'm on the deck or in the booth, I'm always afraid or nervous to run the first few times. It took me, I want to say, an entire weekend or maybe 10 shows before I stopped needing to stand up for this section of the show. It's called Hurricane, as you can see from the top. And a lot of these are so fast. With this show, we used for the sound op, not only do we call the cues like verbally, but there was also the cue light just in case. I think the soundboard op could hear the headset, but we also did the light as well. So this is the sequence, the setup that the previous PSM had set up. And as you can see, she has a dot in there for when to start talking, and then the line for when it has, like the geo has to go. So that sequence there, I found that to be a helpful guideline, but knew that I didn't necessarily have to stop talking there, because of course she and I had different speeds, or there would be a different, like needing a space before you call the geo. I know a lot of people will line it up so it's like lights 90 go, whereas I tend to err on the side of almost too much caution, slightly problematic, of giving myself some time, specifically if it is a visual cue. So this one, this very small 2 cues here is right on the words, trying to button the end of a sentence. However, you get to here, and we hit to points where it's like anticipating a certain action or visual. Kind of the same way Lisa was talking about, you have an idea of where it normally would happen, but you realize that what you're saying, what you're looking for and calling off of, is based maybe more importantly on a visual, which you can see with that notation. For me, and I'll show you that, I would, on top of it, write a VIS above the cue, or draw like eyeglasses to know I'm looking for something as a reminder to myself. I do love how this PSM loved to do like turn page, especially if it was quick. This may seem like there was a lot of time between lines, but this section was so fast and often was driven by the music that you could flip through this so quickly. In particular, here's where it really started to go fast. Right here with these lines down, you would have like 97 have a sentence and then like anticipating a lyric. So this is probably one of the reasons why I ended up taking over the show as a caller versus having someone else come in. Not only was I with the show from the beginning as an ASM, I had also done a previous version. So I was able to know the music so well from previous experience and from constantly hearing it on the deck. So I love this moment was like anticipating the lyric because it was a special on the 2 characters. And there was a moment in here where here's one where it's so much based on the music. So like right here with lights 202 would have been, there was a dot, 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 and you had to try to like make sure the lighting cue finished by the end of the 3rd dot before this character switched into a different voice. So it was a different mood shift. Kind of speaking to what Lizzie and Lisa said about the emotion of it. When it comes to cueing and calling, a lot of times working with line designer, how I like to look at it is figure out whether it is through explicit conversation or implicit observation, what is the intended effect of that cue, so it lines up with exactly where you need to be. So like learning with this lighting designer and learning from watching, it's like, oh, you need that for a mood shift. Sometimes our sensibilities, like my sensibility might be different for the lighting designer, in which case I would clarify it, especially if I was the person who was teching the show. But with this effect, I had the benefit of the PSM and learning through that. There's one other particular moment in here. So here is a section where we hit the melee, which is very much your calling based on music. Where if it was a longer piece, I might have put in like counts in there so I could follow along with the counts, or perhaps cut and paste in the actual score itself. But with the melee, it was 2 short sections of pure music. You really, to be able to anticipate it accurately, it wouldn't have helped to watch visually or anything else. So it was almost like counting, or eventually it became so intuitive that you could call it there. But I'm like, lights 120 or 216.5 and 217.5. With that, we were trying to have the new light cue land exactly with the end of the music. So with that, it was like a little bit of counting. I would go call the lights and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, go. But though I wasn't always counting aloud, if that kind of makes sense. And the same thing happened with the second part here. So this was kind of thrilling in that it was so fast. I'm not going to show you the end of it, but then there was a little bit with set moving and things of that nature. There was no calling of spots with this show. We decided, I think it was budgetary wise, not. But with this particular theater, I would also put in warrants for spots as well, even though the spots were controlled by the light board, just so they remembered what was going on. This script I'm going to show you is not a musical, though there was quite a bit of music, specifically with transitions and with the sound designer. This director is very collaborative, both with movement and with sound to create the mood. The show is Intimate Apparel, which I did a year ago. So with this, because it was in rep and it was so quick, our rehearsal process, things were still changing, we're still finessing. I actually, instead of having a separate call script like I will with longer running musicals, everything's in one script. So as you can see, the top, I notated like for myself as the PSM, specifically a piece with the bed, because we had a bed that constantly moved, like what was the orientation, as well as like different notes for myself for giving notes and maintaining the show. So you'll see a lot of that with this 6 pages. And it's all written in pencil because I don't do digital scripts. How I didn't put my blocking page in these scans, but I will, if I'm doing a blocking script, I have my blocking page on the right and my text on the left, because I am right-handed, so I know I need to spend a lot more time with my right hand. It's more comfortable, and then I'll just plot the numbers over here. So in this case, all my cues are going to be on the left side of my script because that's set up. Otherwise, I tend to focus on putting my cues on the outside, whether it is on the right for the right-hand page or the left for the left-hand page. I also am completely flexible with how I notate like my shorthand. So sometimes I will, even in the same script, I'll start with writing LX for lights and it'll become LQ. It doesn't honestly matter to me. I know it might matter if someone took over the show, but my consistent is that L. And the same with the S, it might become SX or SQ, but that's how that goes. Also with this show, and a lot of shows I end up doing, I will call entrances or other effects. So you will see in here with one of my standbys for the show, I would call standbys for light, sound, and any other things. With Starcatcher, because it was so intense, we had a standby for the entire act's cues at the beginning. But this, I interspaced it in and tried to group them. Also, here's the shorthands with my characters, E for the main character, Esther. And here's where you will see kind of messy, like what I use to notate, like if it's a visual cue, where it needs, what is motivating or prompting. So with lights 1, or what is light 7 and sound 5, it's when the particular character was in place. I didn't write specifically where that would be, but I would knew that was when they were at the sewing machine. With this show, we chose to do each of the scene titles as actual beats of dialogue because there is so much with the show with describing the fabric and the fabric being essential to the meaning of each scene. So we did include that. So you might see later, I have line note notation over the actual scene titles. Yeah. Blocking notation. So similar to the previous scripts, if something comes off a word, I draw a line so it lines up to the end of it, and either will put a line saying here's where it needs to go, or just knowing that's the end of it to call my cues. I don't ever actually write the word geo in my scripts. I choose not to. That's just implied for me. But yeah, here's standbys. Obviously, we had to cue some laughter off stage through the ASM, so I've got that, and it constantly changed. But this is an example of my general calling style. And again, another visual thing for me, I always know that if it's above the light cue and the line isn't drawn out to the script, it's a cue based on a visual if I don't write the VIS or have the simple. And if cues are coming together, I will draw an arrow between the cues like I've seen before. So you see that it's lights 14 and sound 8, go. And because with this show in particular, I didn't have time or a long run to really refresh the book sometimes, or as you see here, this cue 15 would be based on a visual, but it ended up happening later than I originally thought in tech. That arrow this time then again shows me that, oh, this cue might be later down than I originally thought. So that's kind of my mindset behind it. And I'll pass it on to Taylor and stop my screen share.
And I will unmute. My style is actually really similar to what Ingrid just showed you. I do all handwritten stuff. I don't have digital prompt books or anything. I find comfort in my own handwriting generally, and a book doesn't crash on you, there's nothing wrong with the digital calling script at all. But I do think a backup is a good idea too. I actually do not have, because again, I don't have anything saved digitally. I'm going to show you what I have right on my desk. I actually do have a QLab that I found on my computer that I'm going to show you. I built it myself, and I did not run the QLab. I wound up calling it. Which, Ingrid, I actually had a question for you really quick for the Starcatcher script. Were her sound cues written as letters instead of numbers, or were they all numbers?
Let me look real quick. I believe they might have been letters.
Traditionally, that's
Oh, nope, they were numbers. They were numbers.
Okay. I personally prefer them. I prefer there to be a difference between the two that's more than just a digit. So I prefer my lighting to be numbers and my sound to be letters. Again, I'll do whatever anybody wants me to do, and whatever anybody hands me, that's perfectly fine. I'll adapt to. But it is my preference to have it be a little bit different. And that's actually, you'll see it on the QLab in a few minutes, how I marked my script, my show for that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So this, what I'm going to show you is a book that I put together because I was doing they were musical reviews, and it was at a college. So it's very different from a regional or an off-Broadway or Broadway type of show. I actually had to ask for a script. They didn't supply me with one. So the first day of rehearsal, I had absolutely nothing. And I was not with them in their regular rehearsals. We were joined just for the tech part. So I, as the SM, came in during tech, and so did lighting and sound. And again, we had no scripts at all supplied to us. So I literally went up to the director and I was like, I just need words. I just need something to call these cues off of. So the first day is all handwritten. Yeah, it's my chicken scratch. And that was just to get a list of what the songs were, really. I wasn't taking any lighting notes on that particular day because everything was still just being written. This actually translated into something like this. Sorry if it's difficult for you guys to see, but and you can see I wrote up essentially what the lighting designer gave me, and then I added my own stuff. That was the handwritten stuff was what was happening in the moment, and it was changing pretty constantly because we only had, I think, maybe 2 rehearsals before the show, because they actually canceled a few. School was closed for one of them, and then they canceled one of our rehearsals, which you adapt. Let me just put it that way. You adapt to what you have to. I did wind up getting a score, and that's what this was. All my tabs over here are the different songs. I actually wound up only using that for the lyrics itself. I called the show off of this sheet because that's what I had the first time that I called the show. I didn't have the score just yet. So this was actually based on only movement. It was only visuals, and that is usually how I will call a show. I call very much on visuals because a fun fact about me, yes, it was great having the score, but I can't read music. So that's why I was okay with just having lyrics. I told them, if you want to just give me a lyric sheet, that's fine. Having the score was perfectly fine. I learn a show. I learn the feel of the music. Again, I will, I call a lot on visuals. But sometimes, like everyone else was saying, you have to feel the moment. Because even if it's just, an actor speaking, they may take an extra beat one night. And so you're not going to call a cue in the same place you did the night before, because it won't have the same effect, especially if it's, a fade, some sort of internal cue, some sort of spot cue or something like that, that is supposed to help build emotion, which is a lot of what happens. Sometimes you're not necessarily, yes, you've got the cues that you're calling on the button, and those are the fairly obvious ones, but the internal ones are they set the mood a bit more. And you saw me before, I was nodding my head a lot to what Ingrid was saying because I was there on a lot of the vast majority of those shows she was talking about. And it's true, a lot of stuff happens very quickly. The cues that I was just showing you, that was a tribute to Hal Prince, where that was at the end of that, I had we for the beginning of every song we had video cues, and that's the other thing. I don't usually write projection. I usually put in video instead. It's semantics. But again, if the person prefers me calling it projection, I will call it that. I will call, I usually do LQ, SQ, VQ, or PQ, I guess, if I decide to call it a projection. That tends to be preference, because you're the one that's seeing it. The person who you're calling the cue for doesn't see that. So there were videos at the top of each song that would stay in for a couple of seconds, couple of counts. I can count to some music, but yeah, it would stay in for a couple of counts and then slowly fade out. And again, that I took based on the mood of the song. Because sometimes this was also run off of QLab. You would have to change the out for that fade. If it was a quick start, you would maybe take the video out quicker. If it was a slow song, you would maybe fade it out a little bit slower. It's all a feel. It's all how you feel about it. Let me show you the QLab that I've got. So again, this was for A Midsummer Night's Dream. There were a lot of sound cues in this. Like I said, I prefer letters. So in the number column, you see letters. My assistant was also the one who was running the QLab, and she's very new to theater in general. So that was another reason why I added the letters instead of the numbers. Because for this show, I was not calling light cues, but I was calling mic and sound cues. The reason I was not calling light cues was because we had a lighting designer who I've worked with in the past, and knowing him was a good thing in that case, in that I knew how he worked. I think if it had been a new stage manager who had never worked with him before, they would be beyond nervous of how he does his show, because he builds his show. This was a Shakespeare in the Park, so there's permits involved, and you're only allowed on the green for starting at a certain time. You're not allowed on there any sooner, so he's not allowed to build his show any sooner. So he's basically building his show. The lighting designer is building his show as the first show is going on. And that's why I'm not calling anything, because I don't have anything to call. He's just doing, again, it's a feeling for him. He's just doing what he feels is right for that scene, and it looks gorgeous. And he also called the spot cues as well. This was myself sitting in the middle of my board op who was running our mics, and our computer op who was running this. So if you go through, though, there's a scene in this show where it's the lovers asleep part, where all of these, the double A's through, I think, double E, were in rapid succession. Sometimes what a stage manager will do, or a calling stage manager will do, is they will group together their standbys. So if you're doing rapid fire cues, it'll be, standby double A through double F, and then go. Yeah, and that is, there's also why, I will say really quickly, there's a reason why we spell the word GO sometimes, because I've had on headset where I'm receiving the cue, someone just say the word when it's not supposed to happen. there was an instance where I was on spot for a concert, and it was myself and 2 other people. So there's 3 of us all together, and all 3 of us are very good at our jobs. We all know what to do and when, because the lighting person who was calling the cue for whatever show it was, I don't remember, it was you know, all right, spot 3 was on someone, let's say, so spots 1 and 2 were then off. And he would say something like, all right, spot 2, you're going to go out on this cue, and spots 1 and 2, you're going to go out on the same go. I used the word go, what, 3 times in those sentences? So if you're not careful and if you're not paying attention, again, it's a sort of a knee-jerk reaction. You're listening for the word go. So there are reasons why we spell the word. Anyway, but yeah, a lot of these were very quick. So you would have to, and when you're calling a cue, I would say be as clear as you possibly can. You don't want to have your ops saying, what was that? Was that a GO? You don't want to hear, you don't want that, because then it means you're not doing your job the right way either. So again, yeah, well, a lot of these were grouped, especially once I got into the triple letters here. A lot of these were grouped, and I would just keep saying go over and over again. And that was the end of our show. Let me stop my share. I also worked in television news for 10 years. And the similarity for that was I was a master control operator and I was a director for a local news channel here on Long Island. And as a master control operator, it's mostly quality control, but we were counting them into and out of commercials. So the director would give us a roll cue and we would roll the commercial break. And then we would give them the 2 minutes, the minute 30, the 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15, and then we would count them back from 10. So that was calling, for all intents and purposes, that show. And then we had what was called a hard hit at the end of each hour. And then I think we changed it actually to the end of each half hour, so that the commercial breaks that had to air at that time did. And so then we would count the studio out of that show. It's the same thing. You're giving them the 2 minutes, minute and a half, 1 minute, and so on. And then we would have what we called breaking news, where usually it was the directors giving the commands, and or the producers. When it was a breaking news situation, the master control operator had to give the command because they were the ones that had to set up the live event. The director can cue the anchor to start speaking and the camera person to start moving their camera. It won't matter if the live event is not in the playlist to take them live. So we were the ones who used to have to give them the counts for that. And then we had a question from Megan about how do you get show calling jobs and where to search for them. And we were talking about, I haven't done a whole lot of corporate events, but the places that I get my jobs from are mostly Playbill. There's also backstage.com. Facebook, honestly, has been a place for me. And it's sometimes LinkedIn. And word of mouth has been a big one. Recently, because things are so different now, Playbill and Facebook have been my 2 big ones. The rest, everybody else, I don't. Where have you guys gotten your stuff from in the past?
Yeah, I would say Playbill. I'm an equity member, so of course I can go on the portal and look in the equity portal to get notifications there. There are some Facebook pages, yes, like here in New York City, there's Theater Jobs NYC, there's Stage Management NYC that sometimes have those. Sometimes somebody I've worked with before, again, that word of mouth, it puts out, hey, I'm looking for a stage manager who's available, or I'll get an email or a phone call. I would encourage, if you don't live in New York City, I'm sure that there are Facebook pages for other cities that might have theater jobs in general, that can also lead you in that direction. But yeah, those are just some of the things I use.
I've never. Oh, sorry, Ingrid.
Oh, I not show calling, but like deck stage manager for events. I knew producers, and they would ask, like event show producers or event producers, and they would ask, "Hey, are you available to do this?" Or production managers.
For me, I've some Facebook, more for writing than stage management, maybe for Facebook. I think I've applied for one job in my whole career for Playbill backstage. I was casting actors for a play I wrote. All word of mouth for me, really, and hustling and letting people know when I'm available, when I'm not, networking. I've actually never applied for a corporate event. I do a lot of them, but it's all through recommendations or people reaching out to me by phone or by email. You gotta hustle in this business, whatever type of artist you are.
Yeah, any corporate stuff that I have done, it's been somebody asking me to do it.
Me
Um,
too.
just because I worked with them probably for a show before.
Yeah, and sorry, what were you gonna say, Taylor? Nothing. Okay. Well, I just wanted to add some stuff I thought about as we were, going through. When you're calling the show, especially on longer productions, when you have more time with the script, memorize whether your cues are visual or on words, because your head buried in a script is, one, not really that safe for the show, but the show will be so much better, not just on the emotional, just the grand scheme of things. Also, don't call from, yes, memorize, but have your script. I actually went to, I chose to not sub on the show from what I was seeing of the unprofessionalism on this particular production in New York City last year. They were calling from their memory because they had been doing the show for so long. He said, the stage manager, I don't need the script. He messed up, and he'd been calling the show for 9 months. Have it in front of you. It's still important. I still check. Yes, I'm calling from memory, but I still check every time I call a cue, whether it's digital or sometimes I do handwrite. I did show you my digital, but I prefer to have digital because it's cleaner, and I'll print it out and put it in a binder. I don't like looking at a screen. I have had to call on a screen there wasn't enough lighting and I couldn't have a light or anything. It just happens depending on the situation. I also had to call that show on my stomach. Wasn't comfortable, but we got through it. Happens off Broadway. What are you gonna do? And some people, I do this on longer projects. I have a blocking script and then I print out another script or I type a calling script. So I don't have a big prompt script with me every time. Just leave it, little binder, and if I have a cue on blocking, I'll write, Bob crosses to stage left, chair, cue, light 8, whatever it is. But, it's just easier and it's not heavy and bulky and just somewhere small to store it. Also, what did I write here? I can read my own handwriting.
While you're reading your handwriting, I'll
Yeah.
pop in. I showed you my digital stuff as well, some handwritten. But yeah, when even I put it on digital, I print it out. I still work from a written script.
Yeah.
I don't call digitally. I don't like looking at the screen all that time either.
Yeah, I've only called 2 shows in my life like that. I'll print it out. Sorry, Broadway Green Alliance, but it's just easier. Something else I wanted to add is sometimes you don't have a headset to call cues. I've had to do it over text. I've had to do this. You talk to your team, you talk to your ops, and make sure they're comfortable with it. You're not just going to spring on someone, I'm going to go like this, and you're going to take the sound cue. Make sure they're okay with that. And it works. And, traditionally what Ingrid and Taylor were talking about, yeah, sound is written in letters, video, and then lighting is written in numbers. I personally, when I do sound design, I write it unless someone asks for it in numbers, just because it's not fun to say like triple A, triple B. It gets like the language gets a little at least for me personally. So there is a setting in QLab where you can change it to numbers or back, whatever your preference is. But that's just my personal thing as a designer.
Now, every sound designer I've worked with here in New York has done numbers, but that
Yeah.
discussion did come up about some people do letters.
Yeah, they
Now, I've worked with a sound designer that numbers by the page. So if you're on page 12, your sound cue at the top of that page is sound cue 12. And if you have more, it's 12.1, 12.2, 12.3.
Yeah.
Everybody's a little different.
I've seen numbers. When I was in college, someone did numbers and letters. It was A1, A2. It doesn't matter. It's more like, especially when you have these large sequences, saying like standby lights 10 and video 12 and sound triple B. It just gets funny, the language to call if you're not calling to. I mean, if I'm just calling myself, I don't have to verbally, say it out loud. Who cares if it says triple B? But numbers, it's also a little safer these days. And if you are doing, instead of V for video and you're doing projections, so you write P, don't do PP, skip over it, especially if you are. So if it's PA, yeah, I've had someone do that and I was like, just write like, what is it, elemental PQ, just go to Q. It just gets a little funky.
I remember that from college when, I think that was the last consistent time I remember getting sound cues as letters, and there were certain letters they definitely skipped over. I was one of them, and Q was the other one, because
just and if you see that, I mean, my designer caught that. He was like, I skipped over it for you because Nick is great.
Yeah.
Be confident to speak up. No one is going to be, a designer will not be offended if they have to change something like that. I mean, if you're asking them to change like the whole thing, that they might get a little annoyed about. But at the same time, you were the one calling it. This is your baby, essentially. You need to feel confident in it.
Right. And I've had to tell designers before, I actually have trouble with the number 84 and 48. So if they can skip those for me, that would be great.
And nicely say it to them. Don't be like, change this to, hey, could you please change it to 48 or Q or whatever you need them to do.
I literally just say, I have trouble with these numbers.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
So I end up with like, I probably want to call it dyslexia of the mouth a lot of times when I call.
Yes.
Where I'm like, yep, it's supposed to be 126 and I say 216. A lot of times, especially with the particular board op I've been working with, for the most part, they're like, do you mean? I'm like, yes. Or they'll just take it anyway. I'm like, thank you.
And something
I know what I'm doing.
Also, something I want to add is, I've been calling shows since college, so I'm confident and feel comfortable, which is why I do it often. If you are new to calling a show, whatever project it is, because it is a lot to come out of your mouth, take time to practice on your own, just like an actor would run their lines. It is important. It is crucial. It is confidence building. It's good for all aspects of your life, honestly. So take time on your dinner break or at home. I know it's long days and everything, but it's so important if you were the one calling, especially, on Broadway, they rotate who calls the show. They're not necessarily calling it. You might not call the show for 4 days or 6 days or whatever. You might run the deck or do the basement or the office. So you have to do it on your own sometimes. And in all honesty, in my opinion at least, calling the cues is the easiest part of communicating through that entire process. Like, because you're really just saying, there's like actors are saying their lines over and over again, right? You're saying your lines over and over again. So if you can't communicate this effectively, there's a lot you might not be able to communicate throughout the entire process. That's just how I look at it. So you have to feel confident in it.
I also I don't usually put standbys in my script unless
I don't.
A quick standby for the top of the next page.
Yeah.
And then I'll do something similar to what like Ruth, what Ingrid showed you before.
Ruth Kramer.
It was someone else's script. I'll do quick turn or QT is usually abbreviation for that. In the next like I don't know, 5-10 minutes or so. Do you have any questions for us or comments?
Yeah, and I'm going to pipe in on something you said, Taylor. Taylor mentioned she doesn't read music. I don't read music proficiently. I will say that, but I think that I've called operatic shows. I've called Les Mis. I've called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. You can do it. I have a good ear, and thankfully, when I first started calling musicals, I had an amazing music director and conductor. So when we would go into tech, both of them would be like, the cue, we would be talking with the designers, and I want the cue at this point. Okay, I just need to hear that bit of music. That's where the cue goes. Okay, I've got it. It was in my head. So you can work around not being able to read music sometimes, and I will admit this. If I'm looking at a job and I'm thinking about applying for it and it says that you should be able to read music, I don't tend to jump on applying for that because I don't read music per se. But I have found a way to make it work to call musicals so that I can hear it, I know where it is, and I go. And it works for me.
And that's okay if you don't know how to read music.
Yeah.
I personally do. I've been playing trumpet since I was 9 years old and piano, but it's okay. But yeah, don't lie and say, oh, you can do this, because then you're going to get there and you could be fired, and you don't want that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've called the Nutcracker before, which that trio is an extremely important cue. And it's based off of the music.
Yeah.
But again, that is very much, I can feel that out. So
yeah, and I think most of us can do that. But if you're looking at opera or dance, for example, then yes, a lot of times they're going to say that you must read music. So that might be a skill you want to pick up. But I think for a lot of us, we've managed to find our way to call musicals and not necessarily be terribly proficient at reading music.
Right.
I wish I had my most recent call script, because there was an example of having cues in the music, which I ended up, because it moved so fast and I knew it so well, I ended up memorizing it. I was flipping along behind, but I actually, after a while, did not follow the music eventually. But that's only because I was so used to it, and we realized that, especially when I had to train a sub, and realizing like how much I could follow the music and know like when we were jumping, especially when it came to cuts in the music, and knowing that, yeah, that was so helpful.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to feeling when we talk about calling a show caller feeling. I was raised in a time period, I'm a little older, I'll admit it, where we were told as stage managers we were not part of the creative team. I completely 100% disagree with that, particularly in this day and age. I think so much of what we do as a show caller is knowing the nuance of the story we're telling. And we are just as important in telling that story as the actors on the stage, any of the designers, anyone involved in that process. We can make it a beautiful moment that the audience walks away from and really gets that story, or we can screw it up. And so I feel very, very strongly that, particularly because I work on new works and have that opportunity to see how something changes and flows through the process, that we have to be part of that creative process. We have to be able to understand and know the mood and the nuance of a story to tell it to the best of its ability.
Yeah, we're all artists. And just going back to what Ingrid was talking about with the calling the music, most shows I work on have new compositions. They don't necessarily give me a score, but I have to listen.
Yeah.
So they'll be like, this part of the music, that's going to be your video or whatever. So, and I actually love that when I just get to listen to the music and connect that way, especially when there's a lot of tangos in shows I do for some reason, a lot of tangos. Yeah, no, it's
interesting.
They're beautiful. I love them. It's fine. They just happen to be in a lot of one-person shows. And I love to listen. And on the High Hitler, actually, there was this beautiful moment where in this German aria, she has this button and her hands go with it. And I'm watching her and the music, and the lights clicked on like that. And it was just, every time I killed it, and I killed it every single time. But it just was like, ooh, that felt so good. We all have those moments when we call, we're like, it just feels so good. But we also have those on big shows when it's the first time and first preview, and your hands are and everything. You're like, pardon my French, you have those oh shit moments. You're about to drive to Titanic, essentially.
That's why I like calling to other people now, though I hated it because calling a button to an operator can be hard to learn versus do it yourself.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's its own world of adjusting to different formats.
And Megan made the comment of it's great if they can give you a learning tape. I have a learning tape for for Nutcracker, which was okay, and I was grateful for it. But for me, it just helps to be there and learn it myself. It's more a bit more hands-on for me. But yeah, it helps to have a pre-recorded, especially it helps to have a pre-recorded, not just of the show itself, but of the stage manager calling the show, which I don't know if any of us actually has a recording of us calling a show. I don't.
I don't.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh, there is that one of me from the Kennedy Center, but that's not a professional one. Our video designer is just very happy and was recording everything in the booth.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be a professional one necessarily. It can just be a camera on a.
Yeah, there's about a minute of me calling places at the Kennedy Center, but it's cool.
Oh, there's one on the SMA webinar. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions for us? Because if not, I think we're gonna wrap it up.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.